Hello, my beautiful mythical creatures. Ace here, back at you with a new chapter. My pronouns are he, she. We're doing Someone Like You, chapter 10. It didn't take 3 days for Izuku to hear back from St. Dames. The results were more than what he could hope for. He was accepted. Of course he was accepted. He would not tolerate anything less from himself. But that wasn't all. He also received a full ride scholarship. Izuku had hoped that he would, but he wasn't sure what his score would be. But he wasn't sure what his score would have to be in order to get in. Izuku was under no illusion that most of the students attending that school had wealthy families. No school could function without having some sort of income. That meant that those who came from families without money had to be exceptional to take the place of a student that could provide the school with income. In fact, the school is effectively losing money by also providing that student with a scholarship. The physical space the student is taking doesn't cost the school anything, but the resources the student uses while at school does. But that wasn't all. St. Dames is also going to sponsor Izuku to attend any university of his choice. That was far more than he could have expected. With this, Izuku could be successful no matter what he chose to do. He didn't have to be a crime fighter in order to have a life, but he didn't have to be a crime fighter in order to have a life, but he still wanted to. With his education, he could help people however he chose. But he just couldn't not be a crime fighter. Yes, he could be a doctor, a teacher, a counselor. He could literally do anything. But that's just it. He could do anything. But what he wanted to do was be a crime fighter. He had never actually known how much he wanted that until it wasn't his only option anymore. Izuku was ecstatic. He had never been so happy to start school. Unfortunately, he would have to wait. Due to being located in the U.S., St. Dames followed the American school schedule. That means school didn't start until August. And if Izuku thought about it, that was actually good for him. He could concentrate on getting what he needed to be a crime fighter and getting a patrol schedule in place before school starts. He didn't have to do anything at the same time. Not that he couldn't do it. Not that he couldn't do that. But doing it would but doing it this way will just be much easier. All this good news gave Izuku so much energy. He wasn't going to be able to concentrate on anything at home. So it was probably a good idea to get out of the house. He had gotten his first paycheck just the night before. So maybe it would be a good time to go buy his first phone. Inko had never bought Izuku a phone. Said he didn't have anyone he would ever need to contact. So he didn't need it. And even if he did have someone to call, they didn't have the money. Izuku knew that as a single income household, finances were tight. That was why Izuku needed to chip in whenever he could. He knew this. But just once, he wanted to do something for himself. Now that he had banking information, he had given it to boss for direct deposit for his paychecks in the future. But the first was given to him in cash. Inko would never even knew it existed. And as long as Izuku kept the phone hidden, she would never find out. Izuku left and headed for the train station. He was happy that he had switched to automatic tellers. When he was in the last years of elementary school. Before that, Izuku had to basically sneak on the train. No one else would let him on. He always made sure to leave enough money to cover the trip. Whenever he had any anyways. As he got older, the money left for him became more scarce. He ended up having to sneak on more and more often. It always ate him up inside. He couldn't stand doing something criminal, even if it was something so minor. He couldn't even talk himself into jaywalking. He always had to walk to a crosswalk or something. Just didn't feel right to him. So now that he had more access to money, he promised himself that if he ever had to take the train, he would always pay. It didn't make up for him not doing so when he was younger, but it was better than continuing to not pay. This time, he was going to the southern Musatafu. Normally, when he has to go shopping or something like that, he would go to the north. It's a little more of the upscale neighborhood, but as long as you are polite, no one questioned where you came from or what you do. Why? Because it's where most of the heroes in the city were located. You couldn't turn around without coming into contact with a hero. Because of this, crime is really low, and citizens didn't question anything because if anything was wrong, a hero would be already taking care of it. Not to mention so many more people that lived in the area, it makes it easier for Izuku to slip into a crowd. He is rather plain looking after all. Even if someone found out he was quirkless, people didn't know him. If someone told their friend they saw a quirkless kid and was asked what they looked like, they wouldn't be able to say. Going shopping there gave Izuku a sense of anonymous and looking up. Describes a situation where the acting person's identity is unknown. Some writers have argued that namelessness through technically correct anonymity. Unfortunately, that also meant the prices were something. Unfortunately, that also meant that when purchasing something legit, they make you show identification. And due to the identification laws, quirks are required to be listed along with hair color, eye color, and height. There's no way anyone there would sell him a phone with an ID card with the list quirkless. Izuku could have tried to get a hero or police officer to report it, but he would just be told, sorry, they have the right to refuse anyone's service for any reason. He knows. He tried that once. It did nothing but make him a laughing stock. So, therefore, he was going to the south. That's the older area of town. It was beautiful once upon a time, but as the years went by and the city council started to build more and more to the north, the south was forgotten. The homes and businesses were in disarray, and people made a lower yearly salary. And it was harder to find a job. This gave rise to less heroes and more crime. The entire area was now guarded by a few brave police officers, a couple underground heroes, and a handful of vigilantes. In other words, not nearly enough to make the area safe. But it's also those qualities that make it the perfect place for Izuku to purchase a phone. It is not uncommon for people with villainous or undesirable quirks, or even the hidden quirkless, to live in those areas. Businesses didn't bother to ID anyone. The equipment is also technologically unregistered, and it's not like it's illegal to purchase an unregistered phone. In fact, the police force does it all the time to give to their CIs an untrackable way to contact their handler. If the police can do it, then it's good enough for Izuku. Plus, it wasn't a bad idea to have an undetectable phone as a crime fighter anyways. He probably wouldn't stop anything more than the common purse snatcher, But people can be vindictive. If they decided to go after him, he didn't want them to be able to trace him back home. Not because he is worried about Inko or anything like that, because he is sure she would give him up in a heartbeat. But it's where he lives. What would he do if a villain could show up at his house? That's one of the reasons why heroes have confidential personal files. That and fans with stalker tendencies. He was so glad he would not have to put up with that. Once he arrived in South Musatafu, he found an electronics store close by the station. He may have a lot more muscle than he did last year, and even knows a few moves from copying videos online, but he wasn't stupid. He didn't have any equipment with him. He would need at least a lead pole in order to defend himself from someone with a physical quirk. He would probably be able to take on someone with a mental quirk, but anyone else would require a weapon of some kind. And it's not like he would so conveniently be able to find a spare pipe just laying around on the ground somewhere. So he wasn't going any further into the area than he had to. Izuku found the phone display and took a look at the options. If it was something he was going to take with him on patrols, he needed it to be sturdy. He didn't really care about what it looked like. It's not like anyone was ever going to know he had it. On the top of the rack, above the eyesight of the average-heighted Japanese was a phone that literally looked like a brick. It was thick and rectangular, but it was also extremely cheap. He took it down and looked at the specs. It claimed to be able to function in 30 feet of water and be able to survive a 50-foot fall. There had to be a catch. Why would something this strong be this cheap? Oh, that's why. The phone was manufactured nearly 20 years prior. The phone was not meant to hold many of the apps and features the newer phones have. It could only call and receive text messages. It didn't even have a GPS, but that was fine with Izuku. He had been locked out of his apartment accidentally enough as a child to know the majority of Musatafu like the back of his hand. The only thing he didn't know was the interior of the South. But that would be easy enough to memorize when he went on patrol. He had already decided that was probably where he was going to patrol, and needed the most help, and he couldn't just ignore the people there because of where they lived. They needed more help, and he was going to give it to them. Izuku took the phone to the register, paid for it. The cashier looked a little miffed that he didn't buy something more expensive, but didn't actually say anything about it, and left. He was on the next train back to Central Musatafu in just under 30 minutes. While riding the train back to his neighborhood, Izuku set up his phone. It wasn't extremely difficult. He didn't know what his classmates in Aldera were complaining about. A few times during his time there, he would hear one of them say they dropped and broke their phone and had to get a new one. They always complained about having to transfer everything to a new phone and the data they had lost. Maybe that's why Izuku didn't have any problems. Old phone and first phone. So nothing to transfer and no data to lose. That was something he would have to think about in the future. It may actually be beneficial to reconfigure the phone with a custom operating system. Who knows when he will have to hack into something. It would be easier to do it using his phone rather than having to run home and use his computer. And because it's older, it wouldn't have the increased security to get rid of that the newer ones did. He could create his own security. Izuku wasn't sure he would be able to trust the security that came with the phone anyways. He had cracked into enough phones for practice to know it was abysmal. Izuku added that to his mental to-do list. Once he was back in his neighborhood, he still had some looking up exceeded energy. Nearby his apartment was a park. It had been a while since he had practiced his parkour, and Izuku thought it would be a good way to work off his excess energy. He looked at his phone and then decided to put it on the ground under the equipment he would be using. Supposedly it wouldn't break, but he didn't want to take that chance. He would have to remember that problem when he bought his outfit. Izuku jumped onto the jungle gym and brought himself into a handstand. When he first started practicing parkour months ago, he was absolutely horrible. He couldn't even hold his own weight, let alone do anything with it. He could move around how he wanted now, but he still wasn't nearly as good as that underground hero he had found a couple of videos of online. Izuku had saved each video he found to his computer because every time one was put up, it was taken down almost immediately. Izuku wouldn't be surprised if he had the most extensive video collection of the man. His name was Eraserhead, and Izuku had analyzed every single microsecond of his movements. He believed he was close to nailing his moves, but would need more time to burn them into his muscle memory. He jumped from the jungle gym and ran along some balance bars. Then he continued to run around the park in a loop, making his own obstacle course out of the equipment above. He went through the motion. Oh my goodness. There we go. Looking up. Motions. Movements. Motions. Again and again. Perfecting each mistake and finishing the course faster and faster. After about an hour, and at the start of his next run, Izuku was interrupted. "Hey, that's pretty cool. Are you training to become a hero?" Izuku was asked by a boy about his age. The boy had short, blonde, shaggy hair and was wearing jeans and an orange cotton t-shirt. His quirk was fairly obvious. He had a large, thick tail protruding from his lower back. The tail was topped with the same color and texture of hair that was on his head. "Yeah, something like that," Izuku responded. "Parkour is a good skill to have," the boy continued. "I tried doing it myself, but I'm not nearly as good as you are. How long have you been doing parkour?" Probably about 6 or 7 months, Izuku replied. "Wow, that's really impressive. I would have thought you've been doing it for years." "I practice karate, and I know that I wouldn't be nearly that good only 6 months in." "How long have you been doing karate?" "Since I was 4. My uncle owns a dojo and began teaching me as soon as he thought I was old enough." "Where are you learning to fight?" Oh, that's cool. I'm not really learning anywhere. I just mostly watch videos of heroes online." "I see. Why don't you join a dojo?" Izuku paused for a moment. I'm trying to clean my screen. There we go. Izuku paused for a moment. This was a stranger. Should he tell him? Izuku never seen the boy around before, and was likely that Izuku had never seen this boy around before, and was likely that even if Izuku had told him and it was likely even if Izuku told him he was quirkless, he would never see him again anyways. "I'm quirkless," Izuku told him before he lost his nerves. "Ah, insurance?" "Yeah. How'd you know?" Izuku asked in surprise. "Well, you know how I said my uncle owns a dojo?" "Yeah. What I didn't mention is that before he started it, my parents looked around to all sorts of dojos for me. I had wanted to be a hero as soon as I knew what one was. But none of the dojos around where we lived allowed someone with a mutation quirk to enroll. They claimed their insurance said it was too much of a liability." "Yeah, that sounds familiar." "Yeah, I may not know what it's like to be quirkless, but I have a pretty good idea. My tail has made it difficult for me to do things. My tail has made it difficult for me to do things that would be simple for a normal person. God, I hate people. You and me both. Zuko and the boys stood in silence for a moment. The conversation had met its natural end due to them not knowing each other. They didn't know how to start it back up. Zuko stretched his muscles, not wanting them to get cold. It would be rude to begin running again while someone was there and wanted to talk to him. By the way, I never introduced myself. My name is Ojiro Mashiro. I'm sorry if I'm butchering names. I never heard his last name. I always known him as Ojiro. I never heard his first name. That's what I meant. I only known him as Ojiro. Ojiro Mashiro. I'm sorry. I've only known as Ojiro. Ojiro will always be Ojiro to me. Anywho. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you. Same here. It was quiet again for a minute. You know, I'm the only person in my family with a tail. Oh? Izuku was always ready to talk about quirks. There was always something to learn, and there was so much that was not known. He was planning on taking an elective about quirk science, and he was extremely excited about it. Yeah, everyone in my family can create new limbs or legs. I was born with mine. Did you know that if even one of my parents had tails as well, I would be considered quirkless? How? The government does not consider all mutations. This is because there's many mutations that people have that This is because there are many mutations that people have that are in no one related with their quirk. But I worked with someone who has the exact same quirk as their mother, and it caused them to have an ox cord for ears. But are the mutations the only thing they have? Can they do anything with the cords? Well, yeah, they can use them to listen in on conversations or use them to project their heartbeat. Well, that's where the difference is. Their mutation is not actually their quirk. The projection of their heartbeat and their increased senses are their quirk. The mutation just allows them to use it. For me, my tail is my quirk. I can use it as easily as I can use my arms or my legs. But it doesn't actually do anything. I think I understand. I watched Mount Lady a few months ago. She was fighting this villain that had a oh no. Gigantifunction quirk. Giantification quirk like she did. But he had facial features that almost made him look like a shark. But being a shark did not have anything to do with the quirk. It was just a genetical mutation because that was what his parents must have looked like. Exactly. Ojiro nodded. Where did Ojiro come in? Ojiro nodded. Then does that mean there are far more likely quirkless people out there than is reported? That's right, Ribbit. A new voice spoke up. Izuku and Ojiro looked to the left and found a girl about their age. She had long green hair that was tied in a bow at the end. She had the features of a frog and was hunched slightly, and her forefinger resting on her chin. I thought you could only be diagnosed as quirkless if you had the second joint in your pinky toe, Izuku responded. That's how it's done for people who do not have a mutation and don't develop a quirk yet. A lot of people with mutations go to a physical at the age of 8. If they can prove their quirk is more than just how they look, they have a quirk. If they look like their parents and can't do anything, then they're considered quirkless, Ojiro said. Fortunately, I never had to do more than walk into the room with my parents. When they saw I had a tail, they didn't. They said, "You have a quirk," and showed me the door. You are more lucky than I am, then, Ribbit, the girl said. My parents both have frog mutations. So I was scrutinized? Examined or inspected really closely and thoroughly. Scrutinized. They pretty much used any reason they could think of to make me quirkless. It didn't work, Ribbit. And I hope it's the same for my siblings, Ribbit. She pointed to the ground next to her. Izuku and Ojiro looked where she was pointing and found 2 little tadpoles staring up at them. They had large eyes like her sister, but stood straight instead of hunched. Well, aren't you adorable? Ojiro said, crouching down to be eye level. What's your names? He asked. I'm Asui Suyu, the older sister said. This is my brother. Oops, I just whacked the desk. This is my brother, Simurdura, and my sister Satsuki. Ribbit, she pointed to each of her siblings. The 2 younger children hid behind their sister. What do you have to do to dodge the quirkless label? Izuku asked. I had to spit out my stomach. No normal person can do that. So they say that's my quirk. It's called frog. Basically, it means I can do anything a frog can do. I can also camouflage myself and secrete a toxin from my skin. But it's really just an irritation, Ribbit. Ojiro nodded his head, and Izuku had to use his fingers to pinch together his lips to keep from nerding out on Asui. Izuku wasn't sure how to make friends exactly, but if his time in Aldera Middle School taught him anything, it was that people thought his muttering was creepy. He didn't want to drive away people who were willing to talk to him. Hey, you know what? My uncle's dojo is around here. He specializes in teaching those with mutation quirks and how to use them in defense. I can ask if he's willing to teach you. Really? Izuku asked. If you could, I would really appreciate it. Could you ask for myself as well, Ribbit? I want to learn how to fight better, Ribbit. The most I can do right now is throw myself at my enemies, Ribbit. Sure, I can do that. Give me your phone numbers and I'll text you when I find out. Izuku ran across the park to grab his phone from underneath the jungle gym. He wasn't worried about it being stolen. It was an old-looking phone. No one was going to even touch it. He ran back to Ojiro and Asui, who had each other's phones and were just finishing putting in their numbers in. Izuku gave his phone to Asui first, and she gave him Ojiro's. He put his number into Ojiro's phone, they gave it back to him, and Ojiro gave him Asui's phone. Izuku put his number in it, and then gave it to Asui, who gave Izuku's phone to Ojiro. Ojiro and Asui had barely given Izuku's phone a curious glance, but Izuku noted that theirs weren't exactly the newest model either. Ojiro left the park soon after, and Asui followed her siblings to the play equipment. Though Izuku still wanted to check the numbers, he was feeling confident in himself. After all, he just bought a new phone and was heading home with 2 new numbers. That is the end of chapter 10. That was kind of a long one. Chapter 11 will be up next. I'll read you the first little bit, and then that'll be all. Chapter 11. Later that night, Izuku was in the middle of purchasing equipment when he received a text message. He was grateful for the distraction. Well, stretch. Woo. That is the end of this episode. Until next time, my beautiful mythical creatures, stay hydrated and eat donuts. Bye-bye.